Snappy dresser.
Wonderful shoes. Which matches his ties. The very first episode of Star Trek, aired, Man Trap, was written by this gentleman.
Aside from that, modesty forbids him from saying anything further complimentary about me, because I make a living without having a job, and that puts me on the outs. Because everybody it seems is trying to do something Newtonian concept called having a job and earning a living. How primitive can you be?
Let him give your introduction, damn it.
With William F. Miller. He wrote the original story that Ocean's 11 was based on, and the subsequent remakes and sequels. He wrote a number of well-loved episodes of Twilight Zone. This man has contributed to our popular culture, George Clayton Johnson. What we are going to do is reminisce. Well, here's the thing, though. Their greatest credit, or the credit that means the most today, is a credit they share, which is colleague and friend of Ray Bradbury. And so we want to reminisce about Ray Bradbury. I knew Ray for 30 years, but these gentlemen knew him much longer and much deeper than I ever knew Ray. So I am very anxious to hear what they have to say. And the best way to start...
Maggie is whispering in your ear.
What do you think?
I hate seeing it.
What I would like to do is ask first Harlan and then George if you remember the day you met Ray. Or if not, one of your earliest memories.
I brought my earliest memory of Ray with me. Since we were in a library, it is apropos. This book is the first edition of an anthology called The Other Side of the Moon, which was edited by one of the great editors in the fantasy field, August Derrick, who lived in Sauk City, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
This book is called The Other Side of the Moon. I stole this book from the Cleveland Heights High Library. Stole it. Actually stole it. Put it under my coat and stole it. The year after my father died. My dad died in '49 in Painesville, Ohio, 30 miles east of Cleveland. And I got sent to Cleveland to go to school. And they didn't like me and I didn't like them. And I spent most of my time in the library, and there I encountered my first Ray Bradbury story, which is called Pillar of Fire. Now, many of you do not know this story because it was only reprinted in a book that is called R is for Rocket, which was intended for children. But I will read you the opening lines, and you will see that it's not for children. The opening lines of Pillar of Fire. He came out of the earth hating. Hate was his father. Hate was his mother. It was good to walk again. It was good to leap up out of the earth, off your back, and stretch your cramped arms violently and try to take a deep breath. He tried. He cried out. And I said, oh, shit, that's good. Now, years went by. I wound up out here in '62. Ray and I had met in '51 in Chicago. Instantly bonded and we corresponded. But he lived, I think he was out here by then, and I was... Our careers were very different. Ray admired Sinclair Lewis and Maxwell Anderson and writers who had a gentility about them. I was a child of the streets. I rode boxcars when I was 13 years old, rode the rails, drank gypsy coffee with hobos under the trestles, got in knife fights, and I was more like the great novelist Jim Tully, who sadly most of you don't know, and you should, or Jim Thompson, the great pulp mystery novelist, or Jack London. And so while I was out doing it, the way Hemingway said to do it, Ray was reminiscing about Illinois and Waukegan and other unpleasant places. And so we bonded instantly. No one knows why, because we were as disparate as Lemon Abner, who you also won't remember. But I've given up on trying to get most of anyone younger than myself to remember any goddamn thing except who was on Dancing with the Stars. Ray and I hit it off. We saw each other when we were both at the same place, but since Ray didn't drive, that limited our access to each other. But we got very tight through fanzines and other mediums at the time. When I got out here in '62, since I lived at the top of Mulholland and Beverly Glen, I was living in a treehouse at the time, Ray lived right down off Motor Avenue. It was a 10-minute drive. And since Ray didn't drive, whenever we got booked in the same place, I wound up being the schlepper. So that meant if we had to go 30 or 40 miles somewhere, I had to listen to his fucking lectures. 30 or 40 miles, and I learned all the secrets that his daughter doesn't know. Now my big problem about today's presentation, and this was last night's dream, dare I say the things which really would interest them, but boy, they don't really want to hear those things. Or go along with the bullshit about what a great golden icon he was.
First one.
Let me tell you. I'm almost done. And then it's your turn. There are only 3 ways to get your name out of the library. When I was marching with Martin Luther King Jr. from Selma to Montgomery, we went across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I asked everybody around me, and it was all these really heroic, courageous black people. Not all of us white fuckers who would come in from Beverly Hills and places like that, who were going to go home and were safe. These people who had to be there the next day when the Klan and all of these fat buttock white motherfuckers came out to burn their houses and kill them. And I said, who the hell is Edmund Pettus? Not one of them knew. And it turned out after vast research to the Merriam-Webster Who's Who in American Politics, Edmund Pettus was a miserable, parsimonious, pettifogging, little separatist, segregationist bastard who probably should burn in hell forever. And no one knew. So that's one way to get your name on a library. Be a politician with absolutely no ties to anyone who will come thereafter. Who will say, who is Edmund Pettus? Or be the scion, son or daughter of a wealthy family who dies before his time, usually from some hideous misadventure like drugs or running off the side of a road in a skateboard being crushed to death by an imperial. And then the parents will contribute $800 million to some library, and it will wind up being the Farnsworth T. Terwiggle. The third is to be a golden icon whose name is known in every country in the world. There's no place you can go on this planet that the name Ray Bradbury does not evoke exactly the same. God, Ray Bradbury. I remember reading Death by Rain for the first time in Planet Stories in 1947, or Fahrenheit 451 for you youngsters. Ray Bradbury has earned this. You do him great honor, but he does you great honor. You got great honor by having his name on this. And I could tell you stories about him. This book comes back to haunt him and haunt me. We were on the Queen Mary on May 5th, 2002. And Ray used to come to the house all the time, and Ray loved to sign my books. I never I got books for Steinbeck. There were 2 guys who always forced the signature. Norman Mailer was one, and Ray was the other one. And Ray seemed to think that I needed signed copies. And he grabbed, among others, this first edition of Dark Carnival, which had been given to me by August Derleth. It's an Arkham House book. It's very, very rare, very, very valuable. And it's got my book plate in it. It's got a Hannes Bach book plate in it. And he signed it with those awful, leak-through, markers. Those of you who were defiled by Ray Bradbury, raise your hand.
Yeah.
And I begged him, Ray, use a ballpoint. Use something that doesn't leak. It usually leaks through 3 pages. This one only leaked through 1. And he wrote Harlan, this bestseller from 1947, 5 copies a week. Anyhow, I go to the Queen Mary. We were doing a thing. God knows what it was. Something like this. And this book meant so much to me. Because I'm a lamb from the Cleveland Library. My library.
Oh, God.
Still on the lamb.
Oh, no.
In 2002. And I took it up to him and I said, Ray, would you sign Pillar of Fire for me? And he came at me with a marker that was as big as Lithuania. I said, Ray, no, no. And I can project, folks. Believe me.
Yeah.
And I said, no, no, I'll kill you, you son of a bitch. Don't use that. And he used it, and it went through 5 pages.
Oh.
If you think I'm making that up, I will show it to you. Well, here's the page beforehand. It's the end of a Donald Wandry story. And here he writes, Harlan, fellow criminal, love. Anyhow, that story comes full circle, and that's that. Now it's his turn.
All right.
Are you sober?
Mildly.
Mildly.
Mildly. I can really do that. So, Ray Bradbury is a perfectly mature, completely grown adult 14-year-old.
No.
I am 15 going on 16. I'm almost 16. I brag about that. But I'm really a 15-year-old. Because that's when I left home, I ran away with my mother's permission. And I've been on my
She
own
packed
ever
in
since.
sandwiches.
Literally that. She gave me pocket change. But anyway, Ray Bradbury, the first time I encountered him, I knew that he was somehow an American treasure. It was very early on. I wanted to be a writer later after that, but there was Ray Bradbury, a short story. And I read it and I started searching for Bradbury, and I was among a group of people who came together around the fact that they were all Ray Bradbury fans, Ray Bradbury nuts. Charles Beaumont, William F. Nolan, Richard Matheson, even Frank M. Robinson and Ray Russell, editor of Playboy. All of these people, it turns, my God, yes, he's a force of nature because he's a perfectly mature 14-year-old. He's capable of getting shocked. Oh, I'm too suave for that. Nothing shocks me. I am incapable of being shocked. I'm sophisticated and cool. And I'm not Ray. Ray, wow, God, Jesus, are you sure? Emphasis on excitement. And I saw that in his stories. And I saw his love for language. I saw the rhythm and the poetry of the guy. So in answer to the question about meeting Ray Bradbury, physically to encounter him, I went to a meeting of the Fictioneers. It's a loose group of people that organize and periodically get together at a big hotel or something. In this case, the 7 chefs on Sunset or Hollywood.
Writers.
Yeah, 7, whatever. Anyway, there I am with a bunch of penny a word wordsmiths, which made me envy them because I really wanted to be a fictioneer. I wanted to be paid money to keep coming up with new and interesting things to write about so that I could make a living, a few cents a word if necessary, and be a fictioneer. Anyway, I was at a gathering of these things, and Ray Bradbury was the guest of honor, and Ray made a very lovely speech. And I had just recently read a short story of his called Icarus, Montgolfier of Light. It's a little lyric thing, it's very poetic, it's strong, but it's all about flight. Icarus, who flew too close to the sun, Montgolfier in the French flew, Wright, the Wright brothers. Man's need to be like the birds. It's a great lyric thing. So I had read it, and here was me at a bar downstairs from this place, and Ray Bradbury elbows his way in to order a glass of wine. And he's trapped, and I'm trapped, so I get an opportunity to talk to him. You don't know me, I'm George Johnson. And, but I did read your story, it was da-da-da-da-da. And I start telling him how I thought it was a wonderful limited animation, Mr. Magoo kind of a thing because of the lyric content of it, just as a reading. Just get a good reader and let a person read it and then illustrate the reading would be fabulous. No, it won't work, says Ray. Yes, I think it will. Okay, well, I'll go for it. And he gives me permission, so I go home that night and I write a script for Icarus Montgolfier of Light. And I managed to get the script to Format Films, and Format Films invested $14,000 in making a 17-minute long semi-animated film out of Icarus. Well, Ray has publicly given me credit for the fact that I brought that element into the world so that now I share credit with Ray Bradbury. I'm very, very proud of the number of people I've collaborated with, including Edgar Allan Poe.
The Lighthouse, yeah.
Now there's a book out now that is a piece of Poe-esque writing Poe wrote, and people are offering a chance to collaborate with him. So if they'll fit his thing into their thing, and I was one who was successful at that. But anyway, because I'm a natural-born forger, I'm totally uneducated. I've repeated the 6th grade twice, so they wanted me to learn school, but I could not learn school. I left in the 8th grade. I know nothing. I failed everything I've ever gone through academically. I feel alien in a classroom, but I love libraries. Libraries have really been an important thing in my life, and I still recognize Ray Bradbury's contribution to reality by his pains of beauty concerning libraries. Anyway, George Clayton Johnson, that's who I am.
In the small world idea, you of course then remember Herb Clayton.
Come with, or join up with her. And then they would get together. And they would drive and he would mooch a ride. And they'd go to the Pacific dining car. One night, the four of us, Lee was working on a horrible movie for Howard Hawks called Red Line 1000? Red Line 5000? It was either Red Line 1000 or Red Line 5000.
2,500.
It was a racing car movie. And the guy who was playing the lead was James Caan. And James Caan had played me in my Alfred Hitchcock hour, played Harlan Ellison from my book, Memos from Purgatory. So I'm working on the lot at that time. This is after I hit that nightmare of the Oscar. And I was working on something like Nick the Greek or something like that. And I was working in the old writer's tower. And Lee came by to see me. And she said, you know, whose office you're working? It was as big as this table. And an old wooden desk and a chair and a pencil pot and my typewriter. I always worked on an old manual typewriter, still do. And she said, you know, whose office this was? Because she worked with him. And I said, no, who? She said, William Faulkner. I said, no shit, we're going to work at a desk. And she says, yeah, we worked on the big sleep here together.
Wow.
I said, no shit. Sometimes I am bereft of verbiage. Interesting sideline to the story. One day, one of the drawers got stuck in the desk, and I yanked and yanked and yanked and pulled it out, and there was a piece of what we used to call food stamp, yellow second sheet. You could buy them for $1 a sheet. And in those days, we didn't have Xerox. What you had was a first sheet for your original, and a piece of carbon paper, and a yellow second sheet, which was your copy. And you sent off the original to the magazine. Those originals, most of which I now have in my file, are worth millions. And I pulled out this piece of old food stamp. All yellow, it was yellow, but it was all brown around the edges from having been there for God knows how many decades. And all it said from top to bottom, typewriter, top to bottom, left to right, all the way, boy gets girl, boy gets girl, boy gets girl, boy gets girl. William Faulkner. He really didn't like Hollywood.
Like The Shining.
Anyhow, Lee and I would go across the street from the Marathon Gate at Paramount, go to Oblat's, which isn't there anymore. And we would sit and have lunch and have a good old time and talk about names you've never heard, like Ed Earl Rep or Sewell Peasley Wright or Captain S.P. Meek USA, Stanley A. Koblenz. Well, those were the names you would find on Amazing Stories in 1927. And I had grown up on that crap and had gone back and read it all. Crap it was. And one day, they said, well, we got dinner with Ray tonight. I said, fine, I'll go pick him up. So they said, fine, where do you want to go? And I said, well, Pacific Dining Car. They said, fine. So the four of us go to Pacific Dining Car. Lee and Ed had come straight from the studio. They hadn't had time to take a piss. So Lee said, I have to excuse myself. And I said, fine. And Ed said, me too. And they were sitting across from Ray and me. Ray and I. For the two of us. By this time, we were both
Ray and me.
golden icons of literary culture. And about a minute after they had gone off to the potty, Ray turned to me and he put his hand in my arm and he said, you know, we are brothers. And I thought it was, hey, bro, kind of thing. You know, that's, you know, what do you mean? You're from Cheviot Hills. I live up on the poor white man's side of, you know, Beverly Glen. The street is Bel Air. You know. And he said, no, we both have the same mother and father. And I said, really? Them. Wow. And I, as the British comedian Jasper Carrot used to say, fell back in stunned awe. And at that moment, I guess we bonded about as closely as we ever did. And we had such arguments most of the time over dinner. Because Ray believed in God. Firmly believed in God. I am like Nat Hentoff, the great jazz critic. I am a stiff-necked Jewish atheist. And Ray and I would have conversations about the hereafter. And I would say, do they sell popsicles in the hereafter? Pragmatist all the way. I'm for chaos theory. Is that where Hydrox go after Oreo forced them out of the market? And Ray would look at me as if I were a poor, benighted Sancho Panza. And he would look wisely at me. He always admired the fact that I had better hair than him. And he looked at me with great emotion and would say, you'll find out. And I would say, you'll never know. So when Ray was in his last days, oh, by the way, Ray's hearing got very bad at the end, to the point where he couldn't hear anything on the phone.
Yes.
And he had devices, loudspeakers, all manner of things, quad electrostatic screens, God knows what. And I would call, and I would say, "Hey, Ray, it's Harlan." And he would say, "Who?" And I'd say, "Harlan." And he would say, "Who?" And I would say, "Harlan." And this went on for an interminable time. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. And I would say, "Jesus Christ, you old fuck. You know, you deaf cocksucker, can't you hear me? It's Harlan." And he would say, invariably, every time, and you've got a book in your library in the children's section, "Ah, the terrible-tempered Mr. Bang." And I would say, "Yes, Harlan." He'd say, "Who?"
Let's say,
We have a dinner conversation story. Any kind of a social occasion with Ray.
I must say I was always in awe when we were doing the Icarus film, you know. We'd get in those arguments that producers and writers, it's a discussion, right? If you raise turn and say, "Allow me to be contrary." It's just break the rhythm, you know. How can you shout at a man? Anyway, I've always admired the man so much. I'm not exactly quite sure. Part of it is just the electrifying quality that some of his stories have. They're simple as can be, but I look at them with such envy. I wish I could. God Almighty, I wish that was me. Because I know how good that is. And I'm not exaggerating because I'm talking about somebody else. Not my own work, which of course is beyond reproach. What can I tell you other than I earned most of my money writing for the street, writing TV shows and things. I ended up on Social Security mainly because I was able to get gigs at the studios writing for popular culture shows like Star Trek and The Twilight Zone. But there were other things like Route 66 and Mr. Novak, The Law and Mr. Joe. Wonderful show. Honey, what's that? Lovely little detective show. Anyway, learning to write in that form makes it easier for me to write a new story in the form of a screenplay before I turn it into a convoluted language. But oftentimes, that's the easiest way about it, is the picture of the writing of a screenplay. And I urge you all to try and learn how to do that, because that's the language of our time. You know, the media.
Excuse me while I interrupt. This is perfect timing. On October 12th, my father is going to be at the Mystery and Imagination bookstore in Glendale. I have flyers I'll be glad to hand out if you care to come. He'll be talking about writing, and he talks when he gets talking. So there you go.
That's his son.
October 12th, I've got a bunch of flyers. I'll put them on the desk up here, and you can all grab them later.
Okay.
Mystery and Imagination was Ray's favorite bookstore, fortunately.
Black stole a lot of his material from one of my books, The Glass Tip, my television comics, yeah. And he had written me and told me that. So he invited me to, this is true, this is nothing to do with it. Lewis invited me to his last performance at the Disney Center and to a private dinner afterward. So Susan and I go down. Raise your hand, Susan. That's my wife.
Oh, now you
Margaret. 29 years, together 28 married, and counting. We go out of the Disney Hall and join a huge queue waiting to go into the restaurant there, where they serve arugula and other crap that no human being can eat. Some schmuck found out that they could make money off selling weeds. You people who watch cooking on television. And so we went up. We said we invited by Lewis to come down. Oh, well, they had a guy the size of, those big boxes that refrigerators come in at the Walmart. The guy was shaped like that. We on the list. I said, I don't know about your list. I said, Lewis Black's waiting for us. And everybody in the line started screaming and yelling. I said, shut up! Cut your fucking throats! I'm a psychopathic killer! And I always carry a knife with me, god damn it!
Wow.
So, they had to wait quickly. Guy let us in. Lewis came down from backstage, and I knew that we had to say something to each other. When the Pope met Attila the Hun at the gates of Rome, and Attila was about to sack Rome, the Pope came out and said something to him, and Attila the Hun turned back, and of course, 9 years later, Alaric the Goth sacked Rome, but it was, so here, somebody's going to say, Lewis Black, what were your first words together? Like, what were your first words to Ray Bradbury? And I said to Lewis Black, I handed him a copy of a movie that they had just made about me called Dreams with Shark Teeth, which you can Google up, and it's on...
Good.
Yeah.
Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Dreams with Shark Teeth. Wonderful film. And I looked at him, and I said, what a piece of work is man. And he looked at me and he said, are you the Harlan Ellison? Gee, shit. I said, you're a great disappointment. Anyhow, where did I start?
I don't know.
Ray and I once did after this dinner with me cracking up, Ray and I once did a thing like this for a high school. I wish your high school kids had been here. They were really great. I like the one who picked his nose. And I flirted with the one who kept doing this and giggling like a Japanese schoolgirl. They seemed shocked when I told them I had screwed a nun.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I guess this was a Catholic school. They went through it. Anyhow, he gave me this. Wasn't that good? Anyhow. Nice woman. Nice woman.
Couldn't have that.
Oh.
Your mother and I expected so much of you.
Consistently disappointed.
Ever since you stripped the cow.
Oh.
Nice woman.
That was good. Ray and Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, and I, another pal of mine, went to this high school. And we were all three on the stage at the same time and just shucking and jiving. And the kids were loving it. Ray had a terrible embarrassing moment, which I will not tell you about. Complained about it in the car all the way back. But somebody said, think of a story. That's like people who come up to me and say, it's like Willie Loman coming up to his brother Ben in Death of a Salesman. What's the secret, Ben? He says, diamonds, Ben, diamonds. Went into the jungle and hewed out an empire of diamonds. They always come and want to know the secret of life. And I always, where do you get your ideas? And I say Schenectady. There's an idea service in Schenectady. I spend $25 a week. They send me a fresh 6-pack of ideas every week. People have actually tried to get that deal with that service. So somebody says, think up a story. Well, easy enough for them to say about 2,000 kids out there. So Ray said nothing. Frank Herbert turned the other direction. And I'm standing all alone in the middle, they're all looking at me, and I said, how about a doctor who injects his patients with little bits of death so they build up an immunity to it? And Ray turned on, he said, oh, that's a great idea. Yes, I'll write that. Frank Herbert said, yeah, I could write that too. That would be good. And I said, sure. The only one who wrote it was me. It's called The Diagnosis of Dr. Dark Angel. And it's a good story. That was a Ray Bradbury story.
There you go.
Yeah.
George, one last one.
I loved it. I loved it.
that's
I wasn't in awe.
I loved him too.
Yeah.
But I loved
You were in awe of it.
I was in such respect. This guy's going to get his way in this room when I come into that room and read Bradbury. And all of a sudden I'm ready to punch somebody out if they mess with it. You know? Just because I feel totally devoted to the fellow.
Yeah.
And also just to the man that he was. It's not only the literary fellow, but just a real good guy. The one thing that fascinates me is consciousness itself. And if you didn't, that sense of being aware that you are aware, and if you didn't have consciousness itself, there isn't a way in hell I could tell you what it's like to have a mind, to do the magical things that happens in a mind at any given moment, planned or unplanned. Now, one wants to think of consciousness must pervade everything. All of space must be aware because of the sense we have of God or the prime mover or some unifying principle that gives it a heart and a soul and all these elements that we think of as being so wonderful, you know. But at the core of it all is just this sense of being a particle in a mass of particles that goes everywhere, called consciousness. And you can't reflect upon consciousness for very many minutes before you, in my case, before you start to come up with a story or an idea or a twist or a thought. Because I know Bradbury was a short circuit on consciousness. That's one thing that made him so attractive, was the fact that he was aware that he was aware. And he was wanting to let you know what it was to come to realize that you are alive. Out of all the millions and millions of years that have been around, for the last 84, I've been alive. Where did that come from? Where does it go to? Deep, deep, deep mystery. Bradbury was soaked in that sort of stuff. He believed in God.
Yeah.
He believed that no word is lost, that you can wish upon a star. No difference between prayer and believing on wishing on the star.
Yeah. Same thing.
It's the exact same mechanism. And everybody wants to believe in prayer. They want to believe there's a listener out there or in there.
You pray?
No, I don't pray. I haven't prayed ever, I don't think.
I don't pray.
No, I don't pray either. What are we missing? You dismiss it too easily. They're into something. I wish the hell I knew what it was. People who pray, who actually believe that the supplication, and yet you wish. You must wish.
And then you listen to the news reports from Kenya.
Yeah, you're calling it
You
prayer.
wish you weren't there.
Anyway, you get the idea of what I'm talking about is consciousness itself. The minute you start to focus upon that, you'll start to become a writer. Because Harlan can't move a step without it.
Ray loved humanity. Ray really, that's hard to say. Ray really believed in the perfectibility of the human spirit. Ray, in all of Ray's stories, there is an underlying, undercurrent, subcutaneous belief that we are basically a noble spirit. Very different from my outlook. I have a love-hate relationship with the human race. On the one hand, We can paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, write Moby Dick and put someone on the moon. On the other hand, some assholes go into a mall in Kenya and kill 136 innocent people. I come down with heat. This is Ray and me. So this is why I could never be in awe of Ray, because Ray was like a road buddy to me. We would wander down the road arguing about shit. George thought he was infallible. And probably to most people, Ray Bradbury was infallible. And if
For
you
a
read,
14-year-old, he was ready to get it.
huh?
For a 14-year-old,
Yeah.
he was ready to get it.
Yeah. He and I would talk about this, and I would say, I come down with Mark Twain, who said, if you believe there is a God, some great bearded entity up there watching to see whether you masturbate or not, and you look around you at the state of the world, you are forced to the ineluctable conclusion that God is a malign thug.
I was bald, too.
That's Twain.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, I'm not good enough to think that. That was Twain. But Ray would get enraged. He would absolutely explode. He would go ballistic on me. No, no, no. Have you never looked at a flower? And I would say, oh, don't start with the flower thing with me again. And he would do the flower and the golden sunshine, and I would say, Ray, I've read the October Country. Ray, I know about all that stuff. Ray, look what happened in Dubai yesterday, Ray. You know, God makes hair-lipped children. Well, there were many sides to him.
Yes.
I wonder why God did that.
What, did hair-lipped children?
To children, or, or sends a guy into a shopping mall, high-powered rifle. What the hell is that all about? God, can't you see this happen?
Well, possibly, George, it is that someone is listening. It's called the NSA.
Ray sent me a box of chocolates once, only once. I don't eat chocolates, but Ray sent me a box of chocolates. I had a story that was collected in the Best American Short Stories called The Man Who Rowed Christopher Columbus Ashore. That's one of my standard atheist tracts, the basic concept of which is God, unlike Einstein says, God does in fact shoot craps with the universe. And then one day he will give you the lottery and you'll win $20 million, and the next year he'll give you colon cancer. That's the way it works.
Because you won the lottery, so
Yeah, well, it's told in the form of a calendar in which the representative of God, whose name is Lavendus, which in Greek means love for life. Lavendus goes around, and one day he'll help a little old lady across the street. Even though she doesn't want to go across the street, he'll help her across. He's hitting him with a stick. And the next day he'll firebomb an orphanage. And you got picked for Best American Short Stories. And Ray had wanted to, Ray had made it in the Best American Short Stories once. And he wanted to make it again. And he saw my story, he sent me a box of chocolates. And the following year, Ray wrote a story. And I don't know where it was, I can't remember now where it was in Cosmo, or someplace unlikely. Well, he had stories in Cosmopolitan. And it was a wonderful story about a witch dreaming. And I called Martha Foley, who edited the book. She whittled it down to whoever the guest editor was going to be. If it was going to be Saul Bellow or Norman Mailer or Sylvia Plath or whoever. She whittled it down from 10 million stories down to about 50. And I said, you got to look at this story. You got to see this. It's time for Bradbury to be back in the book. And I sent it to her. Didn't make it, but she called Ray. And Ray sent me a box of chocolates. And I just remember that story.
But let me, before we go to the audience, let me just...
Did I go on too long?
No, that's fine.
Not for you.
Oh, well, everybody is still here. I think that's your answer. They wouldn't be here if I went on too long. I told you I worked with Ray on this Nemo project. And then we would see each other.
We have to. And I got to hear him speak at Royce Hall. And he talked about Moby Dick and dealing with John Huston, and it was all funny and charming. But when he started really talking about writing, I really can't talk about his writing because he's such a terrific writer, so far superior to anything I think I could ever produce. But he was such a wonderful human being. By the time he was even 3/4 of the way done, I wanted to run out of the session he was doing and go home and write. There's nothing else I wanted to do. And so I've always been so profoundly affected by him as a motivator for other writers. And when I put together this quiet little group you may have heard of called the Greater Los Angeles Writers Society, we're the largest group on the West Coast. We meet here as often as possible, at least once a month. We have a number of laws members out here in the audience today. We were so privileged to be able to get Ray to come here and speak. And before he came out, we had a little meeting with him on the side there. And at that point, he was very hard of hearing. So I had a tendency to get down on my knees when I was talking to him. I wasn't praying to him, Harlan, honest. But I wanted him to be able to hear what I was saying. And I says, I just want you to know what a profound change you made in me as a writer. And he said, well, what are you doing here today? And I said, well, we're here to give you an award. Oh, he says, well, okay, then you can stay. And he was so incredible. So we, at the time, we made Ray as an honorary lifetime member of the society. This room has been packed twice. Both times have been for Ray Bradbury. So we have a commemorative badge here today for, I made as many as we possibly could.
And thank you.
Thank you. And we just really appreciate everybody coming for the event.
You know, I want to introduce a lady who called me from Utah, and she's here today. Evie King, who is a writer, but also she's a friend of the family. So she's going to give us just a few minutes, because I know all of you, and I thank you for being so patient. I know we have a lot of very, very important authors, writers in the audience, and I want to give everybody a chance to just say something.
Sit down, Maggie.
Yes, sir. Okay.
It's a shame those kids had to go back to
Yes,
high school and not get to.
Okay, Evie, I'd like to introduce Evie King.
Hey, no, I don't want your chair. You can keep your chair. Here, I'm giving you a book though. It's right up your alley, so I have to do
You
it.
don't know where my alley is, bitch. You're Creepy's Guide to the Afterlife. All you need to know to choose the right heaven.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have that.
Blurb by Ray Bradbury on the cover.
Of course. And a 5-star rating system for food, drink, music, accommodations, and entry class.
And you are E.E. King?
I am.
What's the first name?
Elizabeth.
Listen.
What's the second?
Elizabeth Eve King.
Oh, there.
So it's E.E.
All right.
I wasn't planning that, but all the talk about religion, I was like, oh my God, I have to do this book. So I did. I was fortunate because my father was a writer, and actually he was in the first the best short stories collection, probably the first one where he was
What was
in.
your father's name?
Dolph Sharp.
Del Sharp?
Dolph.
Golf Sharp.
Dolph Sharp. And when he moved out here for his health, because he was a well lover, he looked in the table of contents and he called all the people who were in the LA area who were in that book and said, let's start a writer's group. And Ray was one of them. So I knew Ray before I knew he was famous. It took me a long time to realize how famous he was, because he never seemed famous because he was so welcoming. And so I grew up with hearing, sitting on the stairs and listening to them all read stories and then critique the stories. And in fact, Richard Bach was invited to the group at one point, and he was working on Jonathan Williams' Seagull, and Ray kept saying, "You've got to cut it, it'll never sell. You must cut it, you must cut it." And he's like, "I
Everybody
won't."
will get diabetes from it.
Yeah. And in fact, he got it published, and then my father, who was a little skeptical, shall we say, wrote a book called Ludwig von Wolfgang Vulture. A vulture who learns to read, and that sort of left Buck out of the book. He called Ray. He was like, "How could Dolph do this to me?" And so I wanted to just bring a couple of things. This is Ray Bradbury's Cure for the Melancholia. That is a little drawing he made of himself as a doctor, my dad on the box in the back, and the ingredients are all the people in the writers group. And in here is a, I don't know, incantation. You say that to be taken whole, in part, entire, or in portion by the hour, minute, second, week, day, month, or year, if and when needed. And it was for my dad. It was a way to get rid of the blues, remembering who he was, what he invented, and it goes on from there. And there, you can phone for refills, by the way. I don't know where the phone is anymore that wouldn't work, but so I wanted to bring that, since it's so cool. And then this was a book Ray put together for my dad of his stories, an introduction called "I Get the Blues When It Rains," which is also in the Cat's Pajamas, in that collection. And it's about a night at the writers group where they all just sat around and played piano all night and didn't write. And so when I became a writer, Ray, of course, was extremely generous to me. In fact, he called me, he always used to say, "I am your priest, I am your rabbi, this is your temple, now go forth and write." And he made me an honorary member of the writers group and also an honorary daughter. And his own daughters have been very nice about that. And then it wasn't really until I died that I found that the man had more honorary children than a Catholic rabbit. I mean, he's just, everybody. And he would remember everybody, too. I'll stop after this, but this was the thing that always got me. Somebody would find out I know Ray, and they'd say, "He came to my high school class, and he complimented my comic." And I'd see Ray, and I'd say, somebody who said they went to, and he'd say, "I remember that kid's comic. He drew this," and it was always amazing. Oh, and edited by William Nolan.
Ray Bradbury.
I have so much of this from stuff about when Fahrenheit came out. Oh, okay, I have one more thing I have to say. Just because I found it in an old letter he had written to my dad, and he said, "Fahrenheit 451 just came out. Somehow I thought it would make a much bigger splash." So thanks for your time.
I don't care. I don't need that book signed, I got the book.
Richard, do you have something to say?
Thank you.
I'm part of the West Side Neighborhood Council, which Terry Tippett is the president. We've raised some monies for the library, and we're very happy to do
Lots
so.
of money.
Many years ago, I was doing some research at the Academy Library, and I stumbled upon a fanzine written about 1939 or 1940. And in it was an article by Ray Bradbury, who must have been about 17 at the time, about a trip that he and Forey Ackerman, the great editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland, about their trip to the World's Fair. It was...
should all come from the same place. And that moment is the moment that I decided to become a writer. And years later, I was literally crawling through Rod Serling's attic, working on my book, The Twilight Zone Companion. And I found a box in that attic. And inside the box were a bunch of scripts that were bought by Twilight Zone but not made. And there was